2 millennia. That's how long humans inhabited this isolated island archipelago. However, in 1930, all that changed, when the remaining 36 islanders asked to be evacuated, and a unique way of life was lost forever. It's time to visit the most remote part of the British Isles. Let's go to St Kilda. The St Kilda archipelago sits in the Atlantic, about 110 miles from mainland Scotland. Trips to St Kilda are available during the summer months, but cancellations due to bad weather are common. I booked my trip through Go to St Kilda and departed by speedboat at 7 a.m. from Steen on the Isle of Skye. The journey from Skye to St Kilda takes approximately 4 hours and passes through the Outer Hebrides. St Kilda consists of 4 islands: Hirta, Dan, Skye and Borare. Most trips focus on Hirta, the largest island, which has evidence of human habitation spanning thousands of years. As we neared St Kilda, its rugged beauty gradually came into view. We anchored in Village Bay on Hirta and took turns transferring to the shore in a small dinghy. Given St Kilda's importance for bird life, there are specific precautions to follow. We walked over a disinfection mat and attended a ranger briefing upon arrival to ensure minimal impact on the environment. So I have made it to St Kilda. I'm on the main island here, which is called Hirta. The journey from Skye took around 3 hours and it was quite flat. There was someone being sick, but I did take a seasickness tablet before getting on the boat, which probably helped. Once arriving onto the island, we met with someone from the National Trust who shared a short briefing with us and explained the different areas of the island and what areas you're allowed to go to and which areas you're not allowed to go to. I'm the only person camping on the island tonight, so she showed me the campsite here. This is where I'm going to set up my tent. It's not raining at the moment, so I'll get the tent set up first before heading off and seeing what else is on the island. This is the campsite area here. So it's quite slopey towards the back, but at the front here beside this wall, it's quite flat. So I'll probably put my tent here just in front of where I'm standing. They gave me these containers and mentioned that there's mice on the island. So this one here is to put the food that I haven't eaten yet, and then this is for compostable waste. I was also told that if you do any cooking, you should always use these slates under your camp stove to avoid the grass getting burnt. And this is the view from the campsite. That is lovely. On the left there, you can see some scaffolding around the building. That's the church, and at the moment they're getting a new roof put on, and the lady from the National Trust told me that they've been waiting for 3 years for the new roof and it's currently out of bounds. It's not possible to go in there, which is a shame, but there's more places that I can see here on the island. Most people visit St Kilda on a day trip, but you can also stay on the island. However, the only option is to camp. This needs to be pre-booked and costs £10 per night. A day trip ticket to St Kilda is around £280 per person. If you stay overnight, you'll need to pay extra for the return journey, which brings the total cost to about £500. Although this is quite pricey, St Kilda is a place I've always wanted to see, and this will probably be the only time I ever visit. Okay, that is the tent all set up, and I've also set up the mattress, sleeping bag and the pillow as well, so it's ready for later on to go to sleep. Now I will put all my food into these containers so the mice don't get them. So due to bad weather, sometimes the return trip can get cancelled and you can get stuck here on St Kilda. So they suggest you bring enough food supplies for about 5 days. So I have quite a lot of food with me. Here's all the food that I brought. So I have my dinner, ravioli, and then I have 5 more dinners here. I have lots of sandwiches, that's for lunch today and tomorrow and a few more days. I have 2 apples, I have some cereal bars, and I have a few more. And I've got here many packages of oats, tea bags, and also coffee. So I've just finished setting up my tent, and there's a helicopter coming in the distance there. The lady here said a lot of helicopters coming and going today, so to stay well clear of the helipad. That's the tent all set up. I've organised all the items inside the tent, and one of the things I brought with me on this trip is my Manta sleep mask, and it's thanks to Manta sleep mask that I've been able to come here to St Kilda and film this video today. Manta Sleep make the most amazing sleep eye masks. They're so comfortable because they're really soft and they're made from breathable materials. They're also 100% blackout, which is amazing for this time of year in Scotland. The strap and eye pads are completely customizable, so you can personalize it to your head and your face. I use my Manta sleep mask all the time, especially when I'm in my van and also when I'm in cities, because I often encounter street lights which come through the windows. Each mask comes with a bag and also some earplugs. If you'd also like to enjoy a wonderful blackout sleep, you can check out the link below and use the code RuthAshling and you'll get 10% off your order. Thank you to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video today. Now let's go out and explore the island. When we first arrived, it was spitting with rain. It wasn't too heavy, and I can't check the forecast because there's no network coverage here, but the blue skies are out and I feel like I should head off and explore some of the hills and see the views of the island when I have this chance of the nice weather. I'm going to be on the island until tomorrow, and the people on the boat told me that usually they leave between 2:30 and 4, but tomorrow they've asked if I can be ready for 1:30, have everything packed, because tomorrow afternoon the weather isn't looking so great, so they might have to leave a little bit early. The village over there behind me is probably the most exciting thing to see here on this island, but I'll leave that for tomorrow, because if the weather turns bad tomorrow morning and I can't get up the hills, it won't be possible to see any of the views. So I'm going to head up the hills first. While we were on the boat, they gave us this really helpful pamphlet, so you can see a map here of the island, and these are the different walks, and then this is where we are now. So I'm thinking to head up here, over here, round here and back this way if the weather cooperates. And then there's also all the wildlife that can be spotted here on the island. And then for the journey, we left from Skye, and you can see all these pinpoints of the places that we passed. So when you're looking out the window on the boat, you can identify what we're passing. This was really helpful actually. Here's all the information, what the numbers mean. On St Kilda, most of the buildings are located in Village Bay, including the manse, the church, which is currently getting a new roof, the factor's house, military buildings, and the remnants of the abandoned village. So the campsite is to the left there, behind those walls. And then down here is the Ministry of Defence buildings. So I believe they've been renovated recently to blend in a bit more. And then here is the toilet. So there's also showers here. Wow, it's quite well set up, toilets and showers. There's also a room here for washing your dishes. St Kilda was owned by the MacLeod family of Skye for centuries, before being purchased by the Earl of Dumfries in 1931 as a bird sanctuary. Upon his death in 1956, he bequeathed the islands to the National Trust for Scotland, who continue to manage St Kilda to this day. In 1986, St Kilda was designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its exceptional natural environment, including its dramatic sea cliffs, unique wildlife, and isolated ecosystem. In 2004, St Kilda was also designated a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. This status recognises the island's cultural landscape, where the traditional ways of life of the St Kildans have influenced the natural environment, creating a unique blend of human and ecological history. St Kilda is one of only 39 dual-status UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the world. So I've started hiking up, and there is the remains of the abandoned village behind me there. The views from up here are really impressive because you can see all the stone structures, but also out into the bay. It's very beautiful. Behind the village up here is Connacher, and this is the top of the highest sea cliff in the UK, I think. So this is my end destination, and I think it's a bit of a hike to get up there, but first I'm going to go over this and see the views, and then I'm going to hopefully hike up there and then head to that mast in the distance, and I think there's some more views over there. Walk along that ridge up there, down to the other side of the bay, and then back via the helipad. That is the plan for my route. So hopefully I can cover a lot of distance today because I really want to make the most of this lovely weather. I've been on the island for around an hour, hour and a half already, and my first impressions is that the island definitely feels lived on. I had an image before coming here that this was an abandoned island. There really was not going to be much here. However, there's quite a lot of activity. I think there's around 30 people or 40 people on the island tonight. That's what the National Trust lady told me. They might not live here year round, but they do live here temporarily. So it's a little bit different to what I expected based on my first impressions so far. As I hiked up the hill, I passed the sheep pens. These buildings are called cleats, and there's a lot of them all on the hillside here above the village, and also around the village. There's some at the campsite as well. And the islanders mostly ate seabirds. That was the main part of their diet. I was reading a bit about the history, and you would think that the islanders would prefer to eat seafood because they're on an island. Seafood will be abundant in the waters around the island. However, they believed that the waters were quite treacherous and quite dangerous, so they preferred to eat seabirds. So they built these buildings and they would store the seabirds in here because the seabirds only come back for a certain time during the year, depending on the seabird. But for example, puffins are usually only in the area for maybe 4 or 5 months. So they would need seabirds for the winter season, and they would store them in these stone buildings they constructed all around the island here. So interesting. The lady working for the National Trust advised not to go inside because she said they're over 100 years old and they're unsafe and they could collapse at any time and you could get hit by a falling rock. So I'm not going to go inside. The landscape of St Kilda is dotted with over 1,200 cleats. As well as being used to dry and store seabirds, these stone storage huts were also used for storing fish, hay and peat. I made it to my first stop called The Gap. The hike to this point takes about an hour, and this is a popular spot for people to hike to when visiting St Kilda on a day trip. Oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. Look at that. The island in the distance is Borroway, and beside it are the UK's tallest sea stacks. Stack Lee at 172 metres and Stack An Armin at 196 metres. St Kildans harvest seabirds and eggs from Borroway and the cliffs of Stack An Armin. In August 1727, 3 men and 8 boys from Hirta were stranded on Stack An Armin for 9 months. They were left to harvest seabirds, but couldn't be retrieved due to a smallpox outbreak on Hirta, which left too few survivors to rescue them. They sheltered in a small bothy on the sea stack, surviving the winter on seabirds, eggs and rainwater, and were eventually rescued in May 1728. And here's the view down the cliffs. Look at that one. So that's not the biggest cliff. The biggest cliff is on the other side. And down there, it looks like there's a cave filled with water. Wow. So on the opposite side of that cliff is the biggest sea cliff. So that's further up there, which I'll be heading to next. So I'm debating which way to go because on top of the highest sea cliff, I can now see a little bit of cloud, and I really don't want the same thing to happen. So when I was on the island of Fulla in Shetland recently, Fulla has the second highest sea cliffs, and just as I was about to hike to the top of them, a cloud came and I couldn't go up because the visibility was really bad and it was quite dangerous. Looks like the same thing's happening here. Okay, I'm going to go up the highest sea cliff. I think it's more important to go up there. I do have tomorrow morning and I could wake up really early and go up this one here if I want to, but I think it'll be more difficult to get good weather on the highest sea cliff, so I'll head up there next. The helicopter is down in the bay and it's taking off again, and it feels strange because if the people who lived in St Kilda in the 1920s and the people who lived here when St Kilda was evacuated, if they could imagine a helicopter coming and going from their island, I think it's unbelievable. I believe that there is the highest sea cliff that I'm walking up now. As I'm walking further up the hill, I'm starting to see so many seabirds in the cliffs. I believe these are fulmars, and I've spotted a couple of puffins, but they were quite far away. St Kilda is Europe's most important seabird colony and is home to around 1 million seabirds, with 17 species regularly breeding on the islands. It supports 50% of the UK's puffin population, the largest fulmar colony in Western Europe, and one of the world's largest gannet colonies. As I've been hiking, I came across this. So these were used by the people who lived on St Kilda, and they would tie themselves on here with ropes made from horsehair and then dangle over the side of the cliffs to capture the seabirds to eat. I think you can probably see in the distance all the seabirds flying. So I think fulmars are the ones that are mostly on this cliff here. Imagine hanging off the side of the cliff. How scary. St Kildans would capture and eat a variety of seabirds, including puffins, fulmars, gannets and gulls. These birds were a crucial part of their diet, providing meat, eggs and oil. It's a hard dilemma to either go out fishing or hang off the side of the cliffs and hunt seabirds. What would you prefer to do? I think I would prefer to go fishing. I feel like the taste of fish would be preferable to seabirds. However, I've never tried seabird, so I don't know. I guess it probably tastes a bit like chicken. As I'm getting higher and higher, look at these views. It's getting a little bit rainy and the view's a little bit misty now. If you're someone that is afraid of heights, I don't recommend hiking up here. Even me, who is not really scared of heights, my legs are wobbling a little bit. Oh, I'm staying quite far back from the edge. It probably looks like I'm quite close, but I'm about 7 or 8 meters back from the edge. There's a different path there, which is a bit closer. Made it to the top. The St Kilda archipelago was formed by volcanic activity, and this is Connacher, the tallest sea cliff in the UK, standing at 427 metres. The bonksies are back. Get away, get away. Oh, I'm trying to get away from their nests. I don't mean to be so close. God, God, God. These ones are the most aggressive I've ever encountered. Get away. Usually they come for you when you're walking or you're like in the middle of doing something. Last time playing golf, and it's really hard to focus on something but also fight them off. Okay, I think they've given up on me now. So near the top of the hill I've come across another cleat, and as you can see this one has collapsed. The roof has collapsed, so they are quite unstable. I've made it to the top of the highest point. This is Connacher, and I'm not sure if the cliff goes off the edge here because it's quite cloudy. It looks more like a hill, I'm not sure. But there's no views. How unlucky. Oh. I've been sitting up here at the top of the hill for around 30 minutes and it's really cloudy. The clouds haven't cleared. I thought if I waited, they could potentially clear and I might see some views. However, I'm having no luck. So I'm going to continue on with my walk. I'm going to go down the hill on the other side, and maybe when I drop some elevation, I'll be able to start seeing some views. There's the people from my boat. I think that might be my boat leaving. I can hardly see it because of the clouds. Bye bye, boat friends. I've walked down the hill a little bit. I think I've dropped around 100 meters of elevation, and there is the signal tower up here. You can't really see it, but from the signal tower there is a road, so I'm hoping to try and find that road. I'm really glad I have OS maps because if I didn't, and if I couldn't see where I was, it'd be very easy to get lost. It's quite boggy here. I always seem to find the bog. The clouds are starting to clear so I can make out where I am. I'm up here on the other side of the village now. Okay, I've made it to the road behind me here. This road goes up to the signal station and there's a lot of people up there doing work at the moment on it. As I'm walking around, it's unbelievable the amount of these cleats. There's so many of them. The clouds are blowing in that direction and I can see a little bit of the view. There's more buildings down there too, more cleats. So I've come down the road and that's the top of the hill up there and you can see the gap. That's where I first hiked to. So all that area is where I hiked and it's all covered in cloud. At this point here, there is the junction split. So this one is the way I came and then there's this other one which goes round the other side of the bay of the village. So I'm going to head up there and hopefully see some more views because it doesn't seem to be any low hanging cloud over here. So as I look out onto that hill in the distance, you can see all the cleats all over that hill. All those stony things you can see there on the hill, they're all the cleats. There's another signal station of some sort there, and then there's some writing here on the road and it says welcome to St Kilda. Finally, I can see some of the views here without the clouds. The views are absolutely beautiful. And this is what I can see on one side, but I want to show you the reality. Here we have the military, another military network station. There are two sides to St Kilda. There is the military equipment and presence, but then on the other hand, you also have the incredible scenery and the bird life. The military presence on St Kilda began during the First World War, when the islands were utilised for their strategic remote location. The Ministry of Defence site on Hirta was established in 1957, and a radar tracking station was set up to monitor aircraft and missile tests in the North Atlantic. This facility continues to function to this day. This here is an island, it's not connected on, so this island is called Dun, D-U-N. As I'm looking out here at the sea, it's really flat and quite calm today. But in order for the people who used to live on St Kilda, in order for them to get off St Kilda and go to the Outer Hebrides, the distance that they must have had to travel in a rowing boat. So they wouldn't have had a motorised engine, they would have had to go on a rowing boat. The amount of time and energy it would have taken to get to the closest inhabited island is wild. And I imagine at that time as well, the Outer Hebrides were also probably quite sparse. There was probably not much going on there. I don't know much about what was happening there at that time, but it's a long way before helicopter, before speedboat. I think this is my favourite spot so far that I found on the island. It's really lovely. As I made my way back to the campsite, I encountered some of the famous St Kilda sheep, also known as soy sheep. This ancient breed, native to the St Kilda archipelago, is considered one of the most primitive sheep breeds in Europe, having lived on the islands for thousands of years. Characterised by their small size, long legs and shaggy coats, these hardy, feral animals thrive in the harsh island conditions with minimal human intervention. They have been the focus of numerous scientific studies, offering valuable insights into evolutionary biology, genetics, and the impact of environmental factors on natural populations. I came back to the village after my walk. I am absolutely exhausted from the early start, so hoping to make some dinner now and then have an early night. But I don't know if you can hear, they're still doing the roof on the church and it's really loud. I have my earplugs, thank goodness, but kind of annoying. I heard some noises outside and there's a sheepy boy chomping away. He's having his dinner. Okay, I'll see you in the morning. Good night. Hi everyone. It's almost midnight, and I was woken up by a noise, and I looked out there in the porch area of my tent, and there was a huge mouse. I shouted at it and it disappeared, and I've brought my big bag inside because it was already like nibbling on that as well. I really hope no mice have gone inside this. I did double check. At least it wasn't a rat. Oh, yuck. I think I'm going to struggle to get back to sleep now. Okay, hopefully it doesn't come back again. Oh. Good morning. I had my coffee last night. I woke up and I had my earplugs in and the eye mask on, so I fell asleep quite early, but then I woke up to this really loud rustling noise, and I was half asleep, and then eventually I opened my eyes and there was a huge big mouse right in the porch of the tent, and it was just looking at me, and then I was like, go away. And it went away and then it came back again. That was not enjoyable. I once spoke to someone who said that their wife wouldn't go camping with them because they were scared of mice going in the tent, and I laughed and I thought, oh, what a ridiculous thing, but actually it happens. But yeah, overall, apart from the mouse, there were a lot of sheep, quite noisy sheep, so if you do come and camp here, definitely bring earplugs. God, the mouse is back. He's back. The St Kilda mouse is a unique subspecies of the common house mouse and is native to the St Kilda archipelago. It has a more rounded body and shorter legs compared to other house mice. It has evolved to survive in its isolated habitat and has adapted to the island's limited resources and challenging weather conditions. Before the day trippers showed up, I took the opportunity to explore the abandoned village. The history of St Kildans spans centuries and is a tale of resilience and isolation. The population of St Kilda peaked at around 180 in the early 1700s. Life on St Kilda revolved around subsistence farming, fishing and hunting seabirds, with a barter-based economy. The islanders traded feathers, wool, tweed and sheep with passing ships for essentials such as grain, tobacco and other supplies. The society spoke Gaelic and was close-knit, with a strong sense of community. Islanders worked together on communal tasks, and decisions were often made collectively. Despite their isolation, they maintained a unique culture, passing down knowledge, traditions and stories from generation to generation. In the 19th and 20th centuries, St Kilda became more connected to the outside world through increased contact with tourists, government officials and missionaries. This led to a slow erosion of their traditional way of life. The introduction of money, modern conveniences and an awareness of life beyond the island contributed to a sense of isolation. By the 1920s, St Kilda's population had dwindled. The increasing difficulties of island life, including food shortages, declining population, and the psychological toll of isolation, eventually led the islanders to request evacuation. In 1930, the British government evacuated the last 36 St Kildans to mainland Scotland, marking the end of centuries of human habitation on the islands. Today, the island is inhabited by seasonal conservation workers and military personnel. Inside the third cottage, there is an excellent museum. So it explains about the history of St Kilda, about the people living here, about the UNESCO World Heritage status, and there's also some artefacts from when people lived here on St Kilda. The other cottages that have roofs, they're actually used for accommodation. At the moment, the workmen who are doing the church roof are staying in those cottages. I was chatting to one of the workmen and he said they're really comfortable and really nice, and he's really enjoying his stay here on St Kilda. Outside each cottage, there's a slate which says who lived in this cottage, how old they were, and then further on down the street there are more cottages, but they've just been left as they were, so they look more abandoned than the the cottages at the start of the village where they have roofs and they've been renovated and had some work done on them. The ranger said that the interior of the museum is what the building would have looked like at the time when people on St Kilda lived here. There's some shells and pieces of pottery. More things in here. Oh, there's a hair comb. Behind me there's a piece here about the tourists that came to St Kilda, and to be honest, I think I would be interested to visit if I was living back then. I can understand why tourists wanted to come here because the way of life was very different and very isolated compared to the lives of Glasgow or Edinburgh at that time. Here there are lots of things to read about. There's so much you could read in this museum, but one interesting thing is the recommended reading list. So there's a list of books here dating from 1698 until the modern day. There is a book that I'm reading at the moment. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and it's called The Life and Death of St Kilda. It was written by a man called Tom Steele and published in 1988. I haven't finished it, but I'm learning so much about what the life was like here for the islanders, so definitely recommend to check out that book if you'd like to know more about St Kilda. So I was reading that people used to live in these black houses before the building of the cottages, and these didn't really have any windows, so at the front side there's no window facing out to the sea. There's a small window there, but the new cottages were built by the laird and they have windows on the front, and I think they used glass. I read that the islanders found them quite cold and drafty compared to these black houses, which obviously have very few windows and were probably much more sheltered from the wind and the crazy weather. I've walked past, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 houses with roofs on them, and then from here, these are all the abandoned properties. Inside the abandoned house looks like this, and there's a fireplace on either side. You can also see above the doorway, there's a piece of wood there. Wow, incredible views out the windows. Every building is very equal in size, and also all the black houses as well. All the houses have a black house, which possibly was used as a storeroom after they moved into the cottages. Traditionally, they would put turf on top of the cleats like this, so this one has been redone, so it looks like it would have at the time. However, many of the other ones on the island have collapsed or they're quite far away, so I guess this one has been maintained by the National Trust to show what it would have looked like. So inside is like this. It's quite dark, but you can make out that it's all made from stone there. The really interesting thing about this cemetery, which I've never seen before, is the stones are obviously just collected from the island. So on the mainland of Scotland, and most cemeteries you go to, you'll find stones which are constructed into a certain shape and they're also engraved. But here, there's none of that. And maybe they were engraved once upon a time, but it's not possible to see any engravings anymore. At the back right side of the cemetery, there are some more recent graves. This one here at the front is quite hard to read, but there's some at the back here. These people obviously were from St Kilda, but then they decided to come back here to be buried. So on the right side, Malcolm MacDonald, born on Hirta, 1908. And then he died in 1979, so he obviously chose to be buried here. And then the same with Finlay John MacDonald and also Mary Josephine Doyle. Oh, born in Bray, Ireland. So she was married to Malcolm MacDonald, but died 31 years after, and she also chose to be buried here with Malcolm, so together again. This gravestone is very hard to make out, but I can see a date here. 1874. I guess that was the date of death, because the date of birth would mean that this gravestone would look a bit more modern. Here's another one which is possible to read. So Donald Ferguson died on 13th of July 1918, and then Rachel Gillis, age 52, died in 1891. In the cemetery and on the island of Hirta there is no war memorial, which is very unusual. Most communities, villages all over the UK will have a war memorial for the First World War. However, I was reading in the book that St Kildans were not required to join the First World War efforts because they were very remote, they were very isolated, and probably they didn't really have much association. Some of these people probably had never even been to mainland Scotland. It's very unusual to find a place in Scotland and in the UK that doesn't have a war memorial, but here nobody died in the war. Even though St Kilda was evacuated, I wonder how much longer the island would have survived. When I was reading the book about Callum's Road, they implemented a new policy that children had to go at age 11 to have secondary education. So people from St Kilda, they would have had to leave the island when they were around 11 years old and go on board somewhere at a school, and then potentially only come back once every 3 weeks or 4 weeks back to St Kilda. So those young people would have got a taste for the outside world. They might have realised that they preferred that life. They wouldn't have been learning the skills of hunting the seabirds. And also with the decline in seabird numbers, maybe St Kilda, they would have had to stop hunting seabirds. So maybe St Kilda, instead of being evacuated, could have had some outside help and they would have been able to survive. For example, if there were regular shipments coming in, and if people still lived here today, if descendants of St Kildan still lived here, I'm sure tourism would be a major part of the income here, because of course people want to come and visit. And a bit like Fair Isle knitting, there could be items knit from St Kilda that people would buy, and that would contribute to the livelihoods of people living here. Also, some people could have run a guest house. There probably would have been opportunity for people to make a living here as the years had gone on. But at the time, obviously, it wasn't possible. After exploring the abandoned village, I had some time before my boat arrived, so I hiked to the other side of St Kilda, which I hadn't reached the day before. This place is incredible. It looks like a picture frame of stones, and then the view out. This is 100% the best view on St Kilda, in my opinion. The hike had some stunning viewpoints, but as the clouds started rolling in, I decided to head back to the campsite. I need to get back. I only have an hour and 45 minutes before the boat leaves, and I think the hike back is like an hour and 30 minutes. I was racing back down so I could go and pack up my tent, and it became really misty and I couldn't see anything. And then I came down the road and I can see the bay in front of me, but there's not a single boat apart from the one that was already there. I think my boat's not coming today. They would have been here by now. They would have arrived at around 10:30, 11. So they've obviously cancelled the trip, but I have no way of knowing because I don't have any phone signal, there's no network coverage here, no Wi-Fi. Oh my gosh, I'm stuck. I'm stuck on St Kilda. I don't think there's a boat scheduled tomorrow either. I could be here for days. Oh my god.